During the Italian Renaissance, printers started to design their own trademarks to identify their works as separate from other printers. And the cross and orb, also known as the globus cruciger, was borrowed from Egyptian design and was commonly used among the incunabula printers. One of man's oldest symbols, the orb and cross motif, was found in the Cheops pyramid at Giza. It was used by Roman emperors on coinage. It was used by the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and by European royalty to signify authority, so it was a very commonly used symbol. If you think about printers today making the connection, there are few print houses where you actually think of a visual identity. An exception would be Penguin Books, which is actually a British-based print house and very much a part of British culture. Penguin is very well known in Britain and also has imprints for the United States. It is one of those print houses that you automatically recognize and recall for their reprints of classics, paperbacks, trade novels, things like that. So Penguin is very well known and very easily identified. But if you were to think of, say, Rand McNally or Macmillan or even the publishers of the textbook that we use, can you think of their visual identity? These days, we focus more on the actual published works than we do on the publisher. In this two-page spread from the Candelarium, the two top circles are printed on heavy paper and they are die-cut and mounted over the larger woodcut with tape and a string. And this is probably the first die-cut and manual tip-in graphic material to be found in a printed book. This is a really strong white-on-black design that brackets the type block, and it uses fine line diagrams to illustrate the concepts that are being discussed in the text. Obviously, this is a geometry textbook. The vocabulary of graphic design possibilities was expanded by the design and casting of metal decorative ornaments and florons that could be composed as part of the page along with the type. So here we see a very formally structured page with an outside border, and we see these ornaments helping to separate the various words. You can see that there is a title at the top that is separate from the body text, but there are no paragraphs in the body text. Everything is printed uppercase, and to fill up the space, the ornaments are used. The page has very wide margins. The actual active or live area of the design is confined within that exterior border. This shows the original artwork by the illustrator and then the finished printed piece below it. The original drawing was freehand, done in pen and ink on paper. The illustrations were colored with ochre washes. And then in the printing, we still pick up the overall idea, but in the printing, the detail and the gestural linear quality are lost in the translation. The basic layout, though, follows the original illustration. Manutius was a very well-known and innovative printer of his day, and looking at the page on the right-hand side, you'll notice the texture of the heading, which is set in all caps. The text typography and the outline initial all have a subtle but really intriguing contrast with each other. The single line intervals of space that separate the information into three distinct areas introduces light and an additional sense of order into the page. So we are starting to look at information hierarchy, first read, second read, third read, in terms of how the page is organized. This is a two-page spread, and an illustration on the left and the textual elements are on the right. What is clear here is that there is an order to the two-page spread. There is a unity between the width and the height of the illustration and the width and the height of the text block on the facing page. And use of drop illustrations, initial caps, and justified left, somewhat ragged right, but very confined area of type, and ample leading between the lines of type to help legibility. Initial caps and ornaments were used to add texture and color to a page and create a greater sense of visual interest on the page. They also added elegance and a increased sense of value to a typographic page. If you look at the set of border components, you'll notice that they're filled with plant and animal motifs, and they're combined and recombined throughout this book. There's an open linear quality that facilitates the application of color by hand. So what would happen with an illustrator that would come through and apply colored washes into these border elements. This is a title page, and you'll notice that the typography is confined within its own framing device, and it's entirely surrounded by an illustration that takes great liberties with natural scale and perspective and creates sort of an overall flamboyant interpretation of flora and fauna. And notice how the title itself stands out from the detail and the intricacy of the illustration, isolated in terms of change of texture and simplicity versus the complexity of the illustration. Same idea is going on here. There's a carefully measured strap work that's almost seems like it's Celtic inspired, and it also includes figures that represent areas of knowledge, and the Crible background with all the little kind of dots going on adds fine detail and accent areas. Notice the various scaling and leading of the letter forms, the title, secondary titles, the letter spacing, the kerning of letters. So there was a lot of innovation going on in terms of how things were ordered and what the eye sees first in a page design. One of the things that title pages were meant to do, especially with this kind of ornamentation, was to give the reader a glimpse into the interior pages of the book. Sort of what book covers do today. The whole idea of the subject matter of the book, whether it was a serious tome or a playful adventure, would be all kind of calculated and presented within the title page or the frontispiece itself. Notice the rules between the lines of type, and notice that the box, the bounding box for the type, is ovoid. It is elliptical rather than rectangular, but it is placed between rectangular boxes. And again, notice the difference in textural effect visually with the border elements versus the overall texture and simplicity of the typographic boxes. This title page design uses the typography with the illustration by placing it on kind of a hanging scroll, so it is framed by part of the illustration rather than the illustration running around a border and kind of filling in all the margin area, and then the type sits within the border. Here the type is allowed to become an actual part of the illustration, and so it's a little different step in terms of book design, frontispiece design, and the integration of type with illustration. We notice here that there is no border. The type is used to frame the illustration, and the illustration is no longer confined within boundaries. but it works with the white space and integrates with the white space very nicely. There is Roman type and the more calligraphic type that are used in combination. And the letter forms, the script letter forms, are Grandjean's characters de civilité, which were used for the entire text of this book. There's 127 pages in this book. And the serpent device is Grandjean's trademark. Here the border is more open. It's much more, there's a lot more white space, shall we say, within the border motif. And it is not illustrative so much. It is more floral. It uses floral, curvilinear, and geometric ornament rather than representational drawings. And this is very typical of the Rococo period in France. Again, very formal, variety of border treatments. If you look at the various ideas, we have an exterior border, and then we have another wider border which is made up of various devices surrounding it, and within that we have various patterns and floral motifs. And then within the center, the eye catches on this floral motif that separates the type from the type above from the type below. These are a title page, a chapter heading, and a textual page from this typographic manual, and it shows a consistency from page 1 all the way through the end of the book. There's a graphic understanding of the book as a total, and that's important to understand. A single volume needs to unify with itself from start to finish. This is one of Caslon's typefaces, the one that's named after him, showing Roman and italic faces within the font family. There's a straightforward practicality of his design, and this actually dominated throughout the British Empire in the 1700s, in that era. This double-page spread shows an understated use of decor. We have a very strong illustration in terms of the value contrast, the range of light to dark, the realism, the composition, the textural effects created by the detail in the composition, use of implied line, and all these aesthetic devices. And then that is contrasted with the openness of the page on the right-hand side. One of the things to note is that there's a convention going on, and there is a dominating visual on the left-hand side, and the type, the main type, goes on the right-hand side. When we turn the page of a book, our eye tends to naturally jump to the right-hand page in a two-page spread. And the reason for that is just the way the book is laid out structurally. We turn a page, and as we turn the page, it's kind of, we're revealing the right-hand page underneath, and then our eye moves to the top of the left-hand page. And so our eye's going to move this direction and then jump and move this direction. But then when we flip the page, our eye will land here, and then we'll have to go back and start at the top of the left-hand page. And this convention is part of the way we read from upper left to lower right in Western culture. And it's sort of a natural movement of the eye, given a book with pages in it. And this gives rise to placement of important elements within an overall two-page layout, such as for newspapers and magazines. Generally speaking, advertising, people that pay to be seen within a publication, will want to be on the right-hand page and on the outside of the right-hand page rather than in the gutter. So these kinds of conventions and standards were actually set up and have their basis in the Renaissance. This is a Thomas Bewick illustration, and he had an incredible range of tonality by various thicknesses and densities of line. He used a lot of white on black linear technique, which was kind of innovative. Rather than black on white, he would start with a black area and appear to pull white line out of it. So the black was the negative area. And then for the lighter tonal areas, he would flip that concept. He would use black line on white ground. So he was innovative in his illustration technique in that he worked white on black and then black on white in terms of his understanding. And this gave him a tonal range and accuracy in his drawing that became a standard for wood engraved illustration.